G'day, everyone. Welcome to what's going to be a little bit romantic, this podcast. I would have thought it's the last Rugby League game of the season, of the year. It's the Rugby League World Cup final. Who'd have thought it? Australia taking on Samoa. And Samoans around the globe were celebrating last Sunday morning when they made their way through to the final on the back of an incredible semi-final win against England. We'll talk all about that. We've got Gerard Condon. No wonder we've got to be very careful about what we say on this podcast, because unbelievable the stories he's been giving us free. And as we say, if we could only put those on a podcast, obviously you'd have to listen to it after 9 p.m. Check your local guides for details on that one. The usual suspects are here. I'm talking about Tristan Merlehan and, of course, Gerard Condon. How are we, gentlemen? We're all excited for the last game of Rugby League of the season.
Yeah, very good, Jimmy. Yeah, it's funny now. Like we normally put a little hour slot in our diary for when we record this, and I've had to tell my wife we're going to make it an hour and a half now, just to get that half an hour, a little bit of juicy goss at the start, which is always very enjoyable. No, we've got one game of Rugby League left for the season, and it's been a really good World Cup. The semi-finals, we had two cracking matches, and there's a very, very firm favourite going into the final, which we'll obviously go through. But Samoa's done very, very well to get into this stage, and hopefully they can perform admirably on the weekend.
Well, a 30-minute leading delay today has just been trying to argue with Jimmy about what the lunch bet score is. I mean, he's all over the place after 2 losing weeks, and all of a sudden seeing his scoreboard number drop. So there's been absolutely no gossip at all, except for trying to get Jimmy to work out the maths correctly.
Last time I looked, I was plus 14. Now I'm somehow plus 4. So I tell you what, creative account. I'm going to get the forensic accountants to go through this lunch bet table. Anyway.
Jimmy, when we get the accountants in, why don't we just start with a couple of weeks ago with Australia covering the line against Lebanon, and then maybe the update would have been last week with you thinking England were absolutely going to whack Samoa, and that you were giggling about getting only -7.5. The line started 10.5, and it wasn't even close.
Well, that's 2. So I mean, now I'm down to 12, but suddenly I'm at 4. But anyway, we'll get to that. Remember, like, subscribe the podcast wherever it is that you're listening. You can do it via Spotify, Apple, Megaphone. You can watch us on YouTube, NRL Market Watch podcast. I like this. I'm looking at the agenda, and it says Jimmy back-to-back weeks lunch bet losses, and then about 4 lines down it says back-to-back weeks losses for Jimmy, like just to rub it in. But all right, you got it right, Gerard. Samoa win with a plus start in the Golden Point, so that was a good collect for you. What was the overall collect for last week, and what's the overall tally for Pass It On clothing, Tristan?
Yeah, we've got the tally up to 1,327 now. So we got the one collect there, just the one, unfortunately, this week, 100 at the $1.90 on Samoa, plus 8.5. So had a couple of racing bets, didn't quite get the chocolates, but we'll have another crack this week.
So, Tristan, does that 1,327, does that include the 600 and outstanding for Jimmy's lunch bet fines? Or?
No, I can't see any entries through the account, so there'll be a little bit more to come with when Mr. J. Smith gets involved.
So speaking of forensic accounting, we might get them pointed in that direction as well. But listen, guys, on a serious
added on.
On a serious note, and Pass It On clothing, I just quickly wanted to mention, and we'll publicise this a bit more in the coming weeks, but one of their biggest supporters has been Anthony Pitt, and Anthony and Lara Pitt, as many would know Lara from her Foxtel and Rugby League coverage. Anthony is the owner of Academy Clothing, who've been a huge supporter of Chris and Olga, and clothing support for the homeless that they look after every week. What they have done in the background is put together a package. We all, hopefully, are lucky enough to be wearing underwear every day. But one of the key 2 areas that the homeless and unfortunate are looking for every week are underwear and socks. And last 10 or so months, Chris has been able to do a partnership with a great charity out of Melbourne with Trent Cotchin of Richmond fame in providing socks for the homeless, and now with Academy Clothing support, a partnership where if any one of us was to actually log on and buy, and we'll have the link to promote coming weeks, they can then buy a pack of underwear, and at the same time, our purchase will then contribute underwear for the Pass It On clothing to support the homeless. So it's a great initiative. We're all at some stage each year going to have purchases that we're making for underwear, or our family are or alike. We can now direct them to that link and know that any purchase for ourselves is also helping somebody else.
Does that mean I don't put in the money now for is that, or do I still do that? All right.
No, you think of that number and double it.
I'm +4 apparently. Played 48. I feel like Terry Lamb in 1986, 50 games. But anyway, Jared's on -1. Tristan clawing back. He's still -9. But overall, lots of money from us for Pass It On clothing, which is not too bad at all. Semi-finals. Let's go back to them. Thoughts on these games, gentlemen? Australia 16, New Zealand 14. I thought New Zealand threw everything at Australia. High variance game, offload, pass, and then ran out of steam.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it was, it looked like it was going to be quite a high scoring, free flowing affair in the first half. And then, ran out of steam, but there weren't many points in the second half. And I think probably, a lot's been made of those couple of disallowed tries that New Zealand potentially could have scored, but geez, they'd be disappointed with conceding that real soft one off the penalty. I think that was the thing that they'll be looking back on internally and being pretty disappointed with. But it was a great game of football. It was a game of two halves in terms of attack and defence. And I thought it was probably a worthy final. So we got it a week early, and it'll be interesting what we get this week coming up.
I tell you that tap and try off the penalty really bears replay and watching, because we had the runner come in behind Brandon Smith to let him know, because the guy was exhausted, that he was about to be replaced in the coming set of 6 if they were to get the ball. So Brandon Smith is half losing his focus and looking to the trainer who's giving him that message. At the same time, there's suggestions that Anthony Klein actually didn't blow his whistle for the restart. Cameron Murray takes a quick tap and goes straight at Brandon Smith, who was half looking in a different direction, scores a try, and the rest we know. I thought New Zealand was super in the first half. Australia a little bit off the boil, but off the boil on the back of that great unload game that New Zealand played. And going into half time, it was 13-3, the number of offloads. It was breaking up the Australian defensive line. That second phase was getting them play, consistent field position. Then in the second half, they just, in my opinion, blew it. Their self-error. And Jimmy, you made the point on radio yesterday, which I agree with. I mean, fatigue really set in for them. Playing that offload game really took a lot of gas out of them, and they just weren't able to maintain it in the second half. And they led at half time and had 14 points. They couldn't score in the second half. You just don't need to give Australia that much ball and field position and opportunity with the strike that they have. And Australia got themselves back and went away with a win. I think they're on the up, but New Zealand, it's a matter of what could have been.
There is the point to make about the pressure that Australia put on you physically too. So because they put so much physical pressure on you, because it's so hard to get out of your own end, you have to pass the ball, right? And as soon as you aren't prepared to pass the ball or lose focus or are fatigued, then it's almost impossible to get through. So that, in fairness to Australia, although they're not playing well, they still put this enormous physical pressure on you. And that's what's going to be really interesting in this Samoa game. Can they do the same? All right, let's go to Samoa 27, England 26. This is an opportunity where I think Sean Wayne will have nightmares about this, because they played so well all tournament, they saved their best for last, Jared.
Well, they did, Jimmy, but as I made the point...
Worst for last.
Worst to last. And as I made the point last week, I couldn't believe the level of swing that there was in the market on the back of, I think, a bit of hype behind the English and the fact that they had been playing very well, but not necessarily beating anybody that had stood up to them. But they did. I think that whether they got caught up in reading their own press or they didn't start with a physical bash through the middle and the dominance that they'd had with that. And they had everything rolling for them in that first half, yet went into half time behind the 8 ball because they, Paulo was off for 10 minutes, yet they couldn't score. Watkins got over the line and dropped the ball, which should have been a try and could have put them in a much better position. But going into half time, Samoa with far less ball, a 6-2 penalty count against them, still dominated the meters, the post-contact meters, and the physical side of the game. But they also ran into the same headwinds in the second half of fatigue. I mean, they got out by 8, and then it got back to 8 to even. Then they got back out to a lead of 6. Then it got back to even. We went into golden point time, and I thought England off the kickoff, 2 really basic errors just gave the game back to Samoa. They end up coming away with it. I have to say, on the back of all of that, Jimmy, it's just been absolutely fantastic. I think the World Cup, I think what it's done for the game internationally is outstanding. Let's hope that the changes that are being mooted for next year and a potential annual calendar come to the fore. But to see Samoa now get to a quarterfinal and win, get to a semi-final and win, and in England, and now get into this classic matchup at Old Trafford, where already it looks like we've got 64,000 seats sold, is just outstanding for Samoa and for the island nations and for rugby league.
My problem with that is, I agree wholeheartedly, but the problem with that is what's the calendar look like? Because at the end of next year, that's the only time you can play these internationals. And at that point, unfortunately, it's not a World Cup. So clubs are going to exert enormous pressure on players to not play. If you've got a niggling injury, don't play. Get it fixed. And that's going to put pressure on those tournaments. Anyway, we'll wait and see. Remember, it's a 31-week season of the NRL next year. The 27 rounds plus the 4 rounds of the semi-finals and the grand final. So that's what we have ahead of us. Give us an understanding of the market. Give us an understanding how the market's fluctuated during the course of the week as well, Tristan.
Yeah, no, it certainly has jumped around a little bit. So we opened the market up at 17.5, and it was there for a little while at 17.5, hovered around about that line. Then we shot it all the way up to 20.5. It only briefly touched 20.5 for probably an hour or so, and then it popped back down to 19.5 laying the plus. It has been a bit in and out. The total points is 45.5 in this game. Obviously, the Aussie's very short at $1.08, Samoa $7.50. So Australia are expected to win. All the interest is going to be at the line and the totals. When the teams come out, we'll have our anytime try scorers out, which aren't quite. They are out at the moment. So we've certainly got all of those markets there, which will be there'll be a lot of activity, I feel, on the same game multis on this match with some try scorers into lines and totals and that like.
Teams is interesting. So Gerard and I, you separately, and myself have heard word that there's going to be a change. I spoke with Trevor Gilmeister earlier today on radio, and I just sort of threw on, what are we expecting from teams? And he volunteered, Mal's looking at how he might be able to get Ruben Cotter into the game at some point. What have you been hearing, Gerard, around what the Australian makeup might be?
Something very similar, Jimmy. And if we go back to last week, I couldn't believe that Tino came off the bench and then didn't get into the game until about 20 minutes to go. And then made a clear impact. And yes, playing into a game when fatigue was starting to set in, he was going to stand out. But I would have thought that he started in my side. I would have been leaving Jake out, and I would have had Cotter coming off the bench. I think one of Australia's problems over the last couple of weeks has been that they're swapping and changing and moving key players around, hasn't settled on the right combination and the right game plan. And one of the things that they were lacking against New Zealand last week was banging it forward and their yardage and trying to break the advantage line. Now, Tino certainly does that for you, and he also stiffens up, I think, the defence. Now, the word seems to be that Campbell Gillard may be the man that misses out. Tino starts and Cotter comes in on the bench, which also suggests that Jake Trbojevic retains his place. So there's no doubt that he's a high work rate player and he cleans up a lot of stuff and does a lot of stuff. I would have gone with the 2 big men and left Jake out, because I think Campbell Gillard and Tino starting and then Cotter coming off the bench is where you want to punch New Zealand back. Samoans through the middle and try and match what they have up front, but also dominate your yardage moving forward. Because if Australia get a little bit of room to play, they have the strike to really hurt the Samoan team.
You're not going to believe this. I literally have had an email come through from the Gallagher Kangaroos, a National Rugby League media release. Meninga has made no changes to the 19 players selected for last week's semi-final. Squad listed in alphabetical order with official squad numbers is as follows. So that is absolutely no help whatsoever until we actually get
official squad numbers. Jimmy, who's wearing 53 this week?
It's not ridiculous. I think there should be someone in 53, but that's a story for another time.
Jimmy, is the Samoan team on that same list?
No.
No. Okay.
No. So you're the presumption. Well, Manu Brown is out. We know that Danny Levi is out as well. Chanel Harris-Tavita looks like the man moving to the dummy half position, which we know is such a crucial position in any game of rugby league, let alone a Rugby League World Cup final. That's problematic in my mind, Gerard, around how this Samoan team plays.
Oh, Jimmy, it's a disaster. I can't believe that the markets are where they are. So, if we go back a week ago, Australia started minus 12.5 against New Zealand. And I suggested that if I thought New Zealand aimed up, that looked a little bit too generous. But if we then look at the Samoan side into this week, they have no recognised hooker. They'll then look to play Tavita Harris, who looked all at sea and under fatigue in playing that role last week. Who then is going to play the backup behind him? I mean, they'll be handing out Guernseys to somebody walking into the ground at the moment because they're so short on key players in those key positional roles. On the back of that, I have listed at least another 5 players that are now missing from their squad if we go back 4 weeks ago. So we're taking 6 or 7 key players out, including the 2 starting number 9s. And of that, there's at least 3 key forwards. I don't know that there's been enough media focus or exposure to the fact that this Samoan team is so much thinner than it was weeks ago. And though that impact last week was one of the reasons that, when they got leads against England who were poor, that they couldn't hold on. It's a complete different cup of tea this week. Australia got the opportunity to pick their best 17. There's already arguments about amongst us who starts. I mean, Mal's got the luxury of just picking the best. He's got no major outs. I think the line when it went up 19.5 and it's been 18.5, and there are some places who've had 17.5 this week. I'm just gobsmacked at that number. I personally think it should be mid to high 20s. I think 26.5 is at least somewhere where I had it marked.
All right, before we get to actual tips leading out of this game, Tristan, thoughts on the side that Mal settled on, which, I think we all agree probably should have settled on it earlier. Maybe he was trying to keep the peace. But and then the criticism that comes to Munster to a degree, Cleary more directly, and then the manner in which they're playing. It's sort of fair and unfair in a way. Yes, they haven't played as well as they could have, but we understand the circumstances of that. How do you see it?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think if maybe a couple of things had gone a little bit differently in that semi-final, we'd be having a completely different conversation right about now. Because I think by not settling on that side against Lebanon and giving a week to get everything into rhythm, I think could have really impacted that result, and it probably did. But now they're at a point, I suppose, where they've had that run there. They'll be confident if they can get a few points early against Samoa, then you would probably expect they'll be able to run up a bit of a scoreline. So, yeah, I think the criticism is probably warranted in some of it, but I certainly think there's a reason behind it, and I certainly, I'm still a little bit baffled as to how that all unfolded.
Well, I agree. I think the criticism's warranted, but as a good friend in England said to me earlier this week, you can just see how this is now going to unfold. And Mal now potentially walks away smelling like roses, and it was all okay. I think the criticism is valid. I think chopping and changing the team since Lebanon onwards, in my opinion, has not been right. But there's been an expectation as $1.50 and then $1.40 and then $1.30 warm favourite that Australia would just waltz their way through. Well, now not playing England, playing Samoa, who are busted with a whole heap of key outs. If Australia end up waltzing through here and win very comfortably, Well, Mal just puts his hand up and says, "G'day, guys. See this? This is the World Cup, and we won by a big margin. I don't know what all the hullabaloo was about."
Yeah, that's right. He'll win the World Cup for the second time, join Bob Fulton with that distinction. And I think he signed for next year. But beyond that, you've got to remember the next World Cup's only 3 years away. So 2025 in France. Righto. Come on, Gerard. What's your tip? And can they cover the line, Australia?
Oh, no, they can't, Jimmy. I think the line's way too low. And, I love what Samoa have done the last couple of weeks. I think what they've done for the game is outstanding. But, I just hate the fact that they're now going to go into this game so undermanned in key roles in the middle. Plus, they've got no Tago on the outside. I just think they're going to be up against it with forward pressure and momentum through the middle from Australia. I'm sure it's going to be rusty and bits and pieces coming out of dummy half and their ball play. It's going to put a lot of pressure on their 7 and their 6. I think they're really going to struggle. I think Australia then just power away with the game. I think Australia win very comfortably. I think they really put their foot down in the second half, go away with a big margin win. I'm very comfortable that Australia cover the 19.5. I'll be very surprised if it's closer than that. 45.5 is the total points. I think it was 43.5 a couple of days ago, 44.5 yesterday. I think it heads north. I think Australia put a lot of points into the game. And conversely, coming back, the one strength that Australia have had through the last 3 or 4 weeks is their defence has been very, very good, and they've worked very hard in keeping teams to low scores, if not, I think their best has been 1 try against them a couple of weeks ago. And then New Zealand last week got 14 and got nothing in the second half. Where do Samoa points come from? Australia for mine comfortably.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Gerard. Like I think probably the line is maybe artificially compressed a little bit just due to the fact that it's a final, and that's always the narrative out of finals. But I think with the number of players that are out, it's going to certainly be a difficult conveyance for Samoa. I think if they're to be any chance of covering, they've got to be probably in front after the 20-minute mark, which, as you say, Australia's defence has been so good. I know that they'll be lined up in a similar sort of way. So yeah, the total points 45.5. I just got the feeling that the back end of this game there might be a number of points might really open up. So maybe even looking at your second half totals might be a way to come into the game as well. But yeah, I certainly am in agreement. So I think it'll be a minus victory for the Aussies.
The romantic part of me wants it to be a 1-score game with Samoa pressing hard and the siren sounds and Australia win the World Cup. But, I get nervous when we're all nodding with each other. I feel like I'm standing in the back of a Dan Andrews press conference and we're all agreeing. Yes. Okay, but we're doing the same. I'm going to go the minus 19.5. I'll take the $1.92. I'm going to extend that though, Tristan. I'm going to have a look at anytime try scorer, right? 2-scorer try, Latrell Mitchell. Now, the Fox has been the beneficiary of some really good on-a-platter service from Latrell Mitchell, but when the great Latrell is left out of the team of the tournament and Tim Laffey is included along with Stephen Crichton in the centres, it's like, that is red rag to a bull type situation. So I'm going to go anytime try scorer Latrell Mitchell, $2.13. We'll all up that, and that'll be $4.09. That'll be my tip for this Rugby League World Cup final.
So, Jimmy, just stepping into that team that they've announced for the tournament, I mean, was Williams the best number 7?
He had the most try assists, which when you win a game 60 points to 6, but then again, Australia had their chances with. Well, for Nathan Cleary, you can accept, okay, he's not going to get the best halfback. Jerome Hughes missed a number of games, had an outstanding game, and then was very quiet. Milford, no. So yeah, George Williams, yeah. I could argue that one.
Yeah, I thought that was a little line ball, and so Jimmy, you're leading us down a path where there's no lunch bet here. Is that what you're trying to suggest?
Well, this is the problem. What you can do, given the fact it's $2.13, it's almost toss of a coin. If you don't think Latrell will score, say Latrell won't score, and we go head to head with the lunch bet.
Oh, seriously, you've been reading the nursery rhymes this morning. I'm sure Latrell's lining up for a try, absolutely. But anyway, I'm happy that you finally, after a number of losing weeks, have decided to get on the right side of the ledger here. And yes, I think Australia do cover.
Ringer, ringer, Rosie, your pocket full of posy. There we go. So well done on that one. All right.
That might be another one of those T-shirts we can get done for you, Jimmy.
Mate, hey, life's too short to bet the unders, Gerard. You know that. I thought that was very good what we said.
That's an absolute classic. We're getting that one done for you next year. There's no doubt about that.
Now, we will be having a closer look at the NFL. We've been to week 11, can you believe? It's been fantastic. I know there's even some people who are suggesting that the Detroit Lions can make a real impact on the NFL this season. But why don't you update us, Tristan, on the NFL playoff picture when you start doing some markets around the AFC and the NFC?
Yeah, the Detroit Lions are off the bottom of the NFC North for the first time in a long time this deep into the season after two comprehensive, I think, 3-point victories against Green Bay and Chicago. So, yeah, if they can win their last 7, then there's somewhat of a chance to sneak into the playoffs. But just having a look at the outright betting, it's been a fascinating tournament. The Buffalo Bills are the favourites. They're at $5.20, but they've certainly been a little bit iffy in their form in recent weeks. The Chiefs are into $5.50. Philadelphia, they dropped a game that I think a lot of people expected them to win against the Washington Commandos, and $7.50 now. That ruins their undefeated run. The 49ers, $10. Minnesota just cruising along under the radar. They're at $11 with the Dallas Cowboys at $14 and Tom Brady's Buccaneers there at $17. So there's been a lot of ins and outs, teams in form, out of form. It's been a variety of upsets. So it's certainly been a fascinating start to the season. Gerard, who's your pick for this weekend?
Well, the other thing too, Tristan, is, you've probably ordered another Mercedes this week, because the latest stats are that 54% of the games to date after 10 weeks, the underdogs are covering. I mean, the underdogs are absolutely having a red hot run at the moment, and we're seeing some major upsets week after week. And a couple of teams at the top of of either the AFC or the NFC, and the Chiefs and the AFC, well, they just keep ticking over, don't they? 7-2. On the opposite side, we've got the Eagles. They were 8-0, now 8-1. But I tell you, it's very open either side behind that. We've seen the Bills now drop 2 games where, if we'd gone back 3 or 4 weeks ago, the Bills challenging the Chiefs, and many in their power ratings suggesting that the Bills were in front of the Chiefs, now dropping those 2 games. Well, the Bills this week have their arch rival in the Browns at home, but there's snow of anywhere between 2 up to 6 inches forecast for that game. The Bills could be in a fair bit of trouble in the snow with some key outs against their arch rival. So there's a lot happening at the moment. Listen, I thought the better, a little sneaky bet for mine at the moment is the Dolphins. I love what they're doing at the moment. They've got young Tua, this up-and-coming quarterback who's on a rookie contract, which is meant to be able to spread a lot of key money around key defensive and attacking players. And he is really coming to the fore with his arm at the moment. A left armer, he throws like a bullet. His accuracy is brilliant. $18 to win the Super Bowl. There's a little sneaky bet from Gerard longer term. That's something I'm going to be playing. Best of the week, I thought Dallas Cowboys coming off that surprise loss to the Packers in overtime. They go to Minnesota to play the Vikings, who also come off a surprise overtime win against the Bills. I think the Cowboys have got a bit of a point to prove, and they have I think both a ground running game and some defensive prowess that's going to trouble the Vikings. So the Cowboys -1, $1.85 with Top Sport at the moment. That was my betting play of the week. And longer term, I'm having a little interest around the Cowboys at the $18. Jimmy, you into anything this week?
Well, I'm concerned about your Miami Dolphins when they've got to head north in the winter and win in the cold. So that is the concern around that. So obviously, if they do go to the AFC match, you'd think it's against the Chiefs, probably at home. So Kansas City is not the warmest place on the planet come January. But beyond that, they've been very good. I think it's been that so many upsets, so many of the underdogs have been playing well. Who'd have thought the Seahawks would be 6-4 with Geno Smith as their quarterback? Pete Carroll's done it again. And Tampa Bay, say what you like about them, He's done it too many times. Brady gets them wins when they need them, and they're 5-5 and there or thereabouts. You know, the other good story from the NFL this year is like New York's such a great city. They love their football. They haven't had a good football side for a long time, but both the Giants and the Jets being competitive this year makes that a very competitive conference as well. But that's a good story coming out. I'm going to go head-to-head with you. You want a lunch bet, you get a lunch bet, all right?
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. My man Justin Jefferson and the Minnesota Vikings, Dallas Cowboys 6-3. You're going to take the -1, okay? I'm all over that because that is I can't trust Dallas. To be leading 28-14 and then the demons of Lambeau Field Pass just came and haunted them, and they just couldn't get it done against. Let's be honest, poor old Aaron Rodgers and his pop gun attack up there with Green Bay. So I'm with Minnesota. I think
Jimmy, just on the back of your confidence, and given that we don't have an NRL bet this week, did you want to double that up? We have a 2 lunch bet on this one.
Why would you do that?
Well, I just add a bit of spice. I mean, you're very confident about the Vikings.
Now you're just getting greedy.
Well, I just thought I'd add a bit of spice instead of having singles. I mean,
they're $1.99 the +1 too, the Minnesota Vikings. So, you know what? I'm flowing against the market, and you know, when everyone says zig, that's when I zag. So, Gerard, yes, 2 lunch bets.
Beautiful. Oh, I love that, Jimmy. Now,
just
listen,
to give you a little bit of confidence, Jimmy. I was very, very keen on Minnesota as well, so I'm sure that'll fill you with a lot of happiness knowing that I'm on the same side as you.
Thanks Tristan, thanks very much for a sleepless night, Tristan.
Tristan, should we have a little side number one, just one lunch bet with yourself?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think we'll do that. You and I'll just have one, and then big swinging Jimmy can have the 2.
Big swinging Jimmy can have the 2. Jimmy, right. a couple of points just on teams that you touched on there. What about the Dallas Broncos? The Denver Broncos outlaying such an enormous contract for Russell Wilson and going like absolute busters, and all of the noise coming out of that franchise at the moment is so horrible about how that is not working. And then you're right. I mean, up north is the old master himself, just ticking away with the Seahawks and just, you know, turning a season that nobody thought they would see. And then on the Bucks, what about that game in Munich? Looking at the coverage, they had an absolute full house, their first ever NFL game, which was the Bucks against the Seahawks in Munich. And the crowd atmosphere was just stunning. Absolutely stunning. And there's singing, all these Germans singing, you know, Take Me Home Country Road and Sweet Caroline and all these songs. And even Brady himself said in a press conference afterwards, just the absolute atmosphere of that for 15, 20 minutes after the game was amazing.
Yeah, I think they're talking about where next. I mean, you'd love it to be Australia, but the gridiron has a huge history in Germany. When the Allied forces were there in the 70s and they'd play, and you look about the Europe NFL League, and in the end, they're pretty much all German teams that were playing in that. So massively oversubscribed that game, and the global expansion of the NFL continues unabated. All right, so we're all set up for that. The double lunch bet, the single lunch bet, the +1.5, the Justin Jefferson Vikings, away we go. Let's get to some racing. Gerard, what have you found for this Saturday?
Well, Jimmy, I was just a little bit flat spot there about 5 minutes ago, but gee, I'm just so excited now off the back of that NFL. Jimmy, let's go to the Sunshine Coast. Big meeting up there for a Saturday. I thought race 8, number 10, Linthorpe Lad, won its last 2, but the conditions of this race, it gets in with a similar weight, drops slightly in grade. And I thought the race fell away a little bit. It's been in cracking form. So I went race 8, number 10, Linthorpe Lad at the Sunshine Coast, 340 at the moment. Jimmy, I'll just stick with that winning staking formula of 100 all in. And if you wanted to have a lunch bet at the Sunshine Coast, I could always cater for that as well.
Right, here we go. Tristan, have you got one for us this week? Summer Loving, please give the listeners an update on Summer Loving.
Yes, I don't have a tip for us for this week, but yeah, Summer Loving is going to go around in the Wyong Magic Millions. around about the 14th of December, something in that sort of vicinity. So certainly exciting times there to see how that will go, and obviously runs well, and it'll be heading up to the Gold Coast Magic Millions. But it's a really big day of racing, not just as Jared touched on the big meeting at the Sunshine Coast. We've got racing all around some various tracks, which probably don't normally get the Saturday attention, where Ballarat, we've got the Ballarat Cup, we've got the Gong at Kembla Grange, and then over in Perth, we've got a really big meeting there at Ascot where the Railway Stakes take centre stage, and looks a really good field. Alaskan God, $4.40 into $4. And the one that I don't mind down the bottom is number 16, Tricks of the Trade. It's been very, very well backed. I think it's going to be very, very hard to beat in that race. But yeah, certainly a really good card of racing. Away from the Flemington Carnival, it's amazing how racing just seems to keep churning it out 52 weeks a year now.
Speaking of Kembla, race 1 and number 1, Tap and Run. Excuses both runs this time back, draws a better barrier, gets the 1400 at the right stage of the prep. Looks good tempo on paper as well too. So Tap and Run to launch late, Jared. And I'm just looking at the price here, $6 and $2.40. The all-important staking plan here, Tristan. I'm going to go for the collect for Pass It On clothing, $50 each way.
50 each way. Very good. And that's at the $6 at the moment, Tap and Run. So we'll get that locked in.
Jimmy, I have to take my hat off to you. It never ceases to amaze me every week how many stables you have contact with, and you've got the direct dial in, and now we've got the Stubbs stable having a runner at Kembla Grange, and you've already got the push.
Yeah, Stubbsy got hold of me and said, Jimmy, you need to get to the
Stubbsy.
Stubbsy's already on, right? That stable's on. He said, no, tip it to the crew, right? We've got the price. So there. I'd imagine that tumbles in a fair bit over the next couple of days, Tristan.
Yeah, very confident. I can already see the traders out there have been trying to get the hand signals out to them to get it in before this goes live. So I'm sure there'll be a few punters that will be launching in on the back of the hot mail there. Kembla race 1, number 1.
Just like the Vikings have gone to +2.
Mate, is it +2? Where are we? What did you say? Was it
no, it was mine. It was +1 for you.
+1. Oh, right. Just to clear that up. Well, gentlemen, that's it. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of confidence around. Many of it misplaced, but anyway, that's all good. Enjoy your Rugby League World Cup final. Enjoy your week 11 of the NFL, and enjoy your racing as well. We'll do it again next week.
Take care, gentlemen.